Hello, my name is Mike Brady, and today I'll be sharing information with you regarding adolescents and trauma. Why am I doing this? Well, for over 30 years I've worked with at-risk youth in inner-city populations, and I have found that many of the children that I've worked with are more adverse to mischievous behavior and behavior that are out of the realms of a child for their age. So our objectives today will be looking at recent headlines. What is trauma? What does the trauma research show? Triggers to trauma. What are some of our options as those that care about kids? Foster care, and information from the National Center for Trauma-Informed Care. When you look at recent headlines, there are adolescents and youth throughout headlines. For example, today we have one where a mom pulled her daughter's hair so hard that it separated her skull from her scalp. These are pretty serious things that are going on with children as we look at things that are going on in the news. Another headline talks about a teenager who killed a 16-year-old in a park, and it described a very gruesome type of killing from a 16-year-old at the hands of an adolescent. So what is trauma? The term complex trauma describes both children's exposure to multiple traumatic events, often of an invasive interpersonal nature, and the wide-ranging long-term impact of this exposure. Children who do not have healthy attachments have been shown to be more vulnerable to stress. They have trouble controlling and expressing emotions, and they may react violently or inappropriately to situations. A child with a complex trauma history may have problems in romantic relationships, friendships, and with authority figures such as teachers or police officers. A doctor that is very well known in the field of trauma is Dr. Christine Cordes. One of the things that is important to note about Dr. Cordes is that she is a national clinical trauma consultant for the Promises Treatment Centers. I have listed some information down at the bottom on YouTube if you'd like to find out more information, but she is one of the authorities who has numerous publications, and she is very well noted with regards to not only understanding trauma, but ways to help treat it. Now, as principals and teachers and administrators in the school district, I'm not looking to have you understand the mental health aspects of it, but whether we like it or not, these children are coming to our schools, and if we aren't aware of what trauma is, then we are at risk of causing more harm than good. According to Harris County Juvenile Probation Department, the Houston Independent School District referred 3,286 students to their offices in 2012. There were 1,723 African Americans, 1,278 Hispanics, 263 Caucasians, and 23 considered other. According to Fesker in 2014, there is increasing awareness that many children who present behavioral challenges have experienced relational trauma. It is estimated that 1 in 4 youth will experience some type of substance trauma during his or her developmental years. Oftentimes, when victims of abuse enter classrooms, there are no visible signs of trauma. Because of this, educators and administrators, and all in between, miss the cues that indicate a cry for help. Triggers. What are some of the triggers? What are some of the things that allow a very basic situation to unravel into something very serious? Many times, teachers and administrators can trigger negative responses in victims that result in disciplinary action against the victim. Because of perceived student outbursts to be disrespectful and disruptive, teachers and administrators use measures such as disciplinary referrals to in-school suspension, alternative schools, and expulsion in juvenile detention centers. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, children who experience child abuse and neglect are about 9 times more likely to become involved in criminal activity. So what are our options? We know historically some of the options that were available. But it's also important to note that corporal punishment could have adverse effects. While mental health professionals are trained to be aware of the symptoms of complex trauma, it is becoming inherently important for parents and educators and other professionals that are involved in caring for youth and adolescents to develop an awareness of some of the signs of trauma. What are some of our options? That's the question that we all want to know. But adolescents that have experienced trauma are not well served in traditional intervention in schools, treatment settings, and communities. According to the National Center for Trauma-Informed Care, when a human service program takes the step to become trauma-informed, every part of its organization, management, and service delivery system is assessed and potentially modified to include a basic understanding of how trauma affects the life of an individual seeking services. One of the systems that experience trauma from a much greater perspective is the foster care system. In 2010, 408,425 youth were in foster care in the United States. Those who enter foster care have usually experienced multiple traumatic events perpetrated by a caregiver, which typically serve as the precipitant for removal from their homes. In a longitudinal study that observed youth in foster care, it was found that they represent a highly traumatized population. Many times, due to privacy laws, youth workers are not aware of foster care youth. According to the study, the majority of the 732 adolescents at age 17 and 18 who were in foster care experienced at least one trauma in their lifetime. Caucasian participants reported higher rates of trauma exposure than African American participants did. The study concluded that youth in foster care meet the diagnostic criteria for PTSD at higher rates than general populations. The National Center for Trauma-Informed Care is an approach, according to them, that trauma-informed care is an approach to engaging people with histories of trauma that recognizes the presence of trauma symptoms and acknowledges the role that trauma has played in their lives. The NCTIC facilitates the adoption of trauma-informed environments in the delivery of a broad range of services, including mental health, substance abuse, housing, vocational or employment support, domestic violence, and victim assistance and peer support. In all these environments, the NCTIC seeks to change the paradigm from one that asks, "What's wrong with you?" to one that asks, "What has happened to you?" Fetzer asserts that the life space crisis intervention model is a viable resource for using crisis as a basis for learning and therapy with traumatized children and youth. As the adult engages with the young person, the adult seeks to understand the issue from the young person's point of view. Studies have demonstrated positive effects of the LSCI in a variety of settings, such as an urban alternative junior high school. When staff members are trained, studies show that suspensions and the frequency of crisis is decreased. So when examining some of today's headlines regarding adolescents and children, it is highly conceivable that many youth have been exposed to some form of trauma. The ability to understand a young person's perspective is critical to addressing some of the pitfalls in an educational system that can be punitive for adolescents in schools, playgrounds, and recreation centers. Despite the possible risk, resources for the individual, family, and community all contribute to the ability to overcome obstacles. Protective factors are resources that can offset the effects of a traumatic event and include factors such as a sense of cultural identity and a belief that life is meaningful. So in looking at trauma and how it impacts adolescents, as educators, teachers aides, all those that have contact with children that are coming into educational systems, it is imperative that we learn what trauma-informed care is. Many times when we see what is considered bad behavior, we have a general tendency to do what was done to us. And I think that the children and adolescents that come through our systems need a little bit more than what we were given. Many of us grew up in the day of corporal punishment. And while I can see some of that benefit today, it's not applicable everywhere you go. The other aspect of this is that there is more and more research that shows that children as early as preschool and Head Start age are showing signs of complex trauma. Many times we don't know the history of the parents, and all too often the children are at the hands of the perpetrator even when they're being dropped off to school. One example, a former Miss America by the name of Marilyn Vanderbilt was Miss America, and she wrote a book called Day Child, Night Child. And in that book, she outlines her experience with abuse, sexual abuse. By day, she had a father that was very prominent in the Colorado area, that was very well known and very powerful. By night, she was raped and molested by the same father. In the context of that, when at nighttime she would go into such a serious disassociation with what was going on to where her body literally would just freeze up. By the next day, she had no memory of what happened, and by daytime, she was back together with her dad. These are some of the things that are going on that as educators and people that care about kids, that we can't even fathom. But the reality is this: there is help available. There are resources. So I come to you as one that cares about the same children that you teach and educate throughout the days and weeks of a school year. I come to you urging administrators to investigate some of the resources that are available. I have listed in my resources some organizations that are very capable and able to give information regarding this subject matter. One of them is the National Center for Trauma-Informed Care. They offer workshops, information, workbooks, all those types of things. I hope by now that you understand that this is not just about a good child or a bad child. This is about a population of children that seems to be growing in our society. It knows no boundaries. It goes from inner city to suburban life. We see more in our headlines how that children are impacted negatively by trauma that they're exposed to. Some of our city streets and areas have severe violence that children at a very early age are exposed to, and it has long-term implications without help. This is an opportunity for us to come together and help those children and adolescents in which we serve. Thank you. Have a great day.